Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejohn Sarwick. Sejohn?
Hey, Dev. Hey, everybody. What's going on?
What's going on is we're returning the listeners to their regularly scheduled Say Report content because Brendan Fraser History Month is sadly over.
No, yeah, but it always has to come to
I
an end.
know, and that's what makes it so special. If every day were Brendan Fraser History Month, first of all, we wouldn't understand what days are. But
Or
second
months.
of all,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be as special. So, yeah, that's it. But the important thing to note is we don't put our lives on hold during Brendan Fraser History Month.
No. Yeah.
Nay, the contrary, we put our lives into a little shared notepad to talk about
That
once.
we then hold.
um, so this episode, in addition to our usual, rapid fire, talky, jokey, hangout fun in the beginning, we have, I want to say conservatively, about 18 topics to talk about.
hmm Yeah. Which that's putting it lightly. We're those are clearly going to do what they always do, which is spin off other things for us to talk about. Also, we'll remember things throughout. But yeah, we're starting off with a hefty list.
Yeah. But before that, some stuff happened just over this weekend. So let's be pressing and discuss this stuff for the weekend. Sejohn, we drew straws before the show. We haven't checked yet. Did you get the long straw or the short straw?
Uh, well, I would need to compare it to yours. That's a hard
Oh, okay.
question.
Well, let's put them together. We're holding them up next to each other.
Yeah, nothing like two men comparing straws for audio fun. I think I got the short straw.
All right. That means you get to go first, man.
So I had a heck of a weekend on top of many a thing. For starters, finally got my car moving after a year and a half of sitting in one spot.
That's good. Did you really? Did
Right?
you like not start it at all for
It
a
started.
year
No,
and a half?
and I know better. Like, let's not act like I was surprised when I went out and tried to start my car and it was foobarred. That just
And
didn't. Yeah, that
moths
didn't
flew out
happen.
the tailpipe as
Uh,
there was a
uh,
nest of baby birds.
So shout out to the great people of AAA. I it's very weird. You know how like I know AAA growing up on the East Coast as like you call somebody a AAA and then they call somebody who's not at AAA and then 2 hours later somebody shows up at your house with a truck that is way too big for your car to do anything. And that's not how they do it out here. Like we called AAA and within 20 minutes they had a little AAA truck at our house with a guy full of like AAA batteries and parts and pieces fixing my car.
Yeah,
It was insane.
what you're discussing is how AAA contracts out to local like body shops in order to help people, and that always struck me as odd, especially in the state of Rhode Island, because like the AAA building, there are two, but both of them are usually used to give directions. And at both
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
AAA buildings in Rhode
And buy
Island,
movie tickets. Like give
yeah,
directions and buy movie
yes,
tickets.
run into Will Gilbert while you're getting your license renewed. He's behind you in line, and it's like, oh, hey, it's Will Gilbert. Hey, Will Gilbert, how's the road show?
Oh man.
But yeah, it's like it's just local celebrity movie tickets and giving directions. That's what the two AAAs, one in Warwick and one in Providence, are for. But also at both of those locations, there are fleets of AAA trucks.
Yes.
So the fact that even when, I mean, I think the one that I share with you, the most prominent thought I have of a AAA experience is when we went to go see Over the Hedge. And when we got outside, the front passenger tire was deflated, and the person we were with, Pep Osworth, he did not have a tire in his car to replace that with, so we had to call AAA and hang out at the movie theater waiting for AAA. And when the person arrived, I believe it was a security guard from URI, which is where we were heading, like with
Yeah,
a
yeah.
jack and a tire, and it's just like,
hmm
what is this, right? I literally I would tell people the exit after the AAA in Warwick, that's the movie theater we're at. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh man. The other thing is that a AAA guy will come and put your car on his truck, and at that point will say to you, "By the way, I have to take you to a very specific mechanic that's four mechanics down from the one that you expect to be." Like, yeah, we're gonna pass every other mechanic in the state of Rhode Island on the way to the mechanic I got to drop you off at. Bye. And it's just like, what the hell, man? But no, yeah, the guy showed up with his little AAA truck, and it was wild. Like he popped out within an hour, like had my car up and going again, and he's like, make sure you drive it, you know, sometimes. I was like, yeah, no, that's
Ever,
fair.
ever, just
Oh
drive the car.
man. Look, COVID was a hard time. But yeah, so that was the start of my weekend, was like getting my car in order and like getting that going. And so I had to spend the weekend just driving around and like doing things, right? Like I had to be like every errand I was like, yeah, I'll go, and here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to the grocery store, then I'll drive back. Then I'm gonna go to the drugstore, then I'll drive back. Then I'll go and pick up the dogs, and then I'll drive back. Like it's like any chance I got to like get in a little bit of driving this weekend. So I found myself in downtown Salt Lake and ended my weekend at, of all things, a fucking crawdad boil.
That's weird. I didn't know that crawdads existed that far west or that far
Well,
north.
so the deal is we had to have them shipped in from Louisiana like under 24 hours. Like so this company that will box them up in just big old styrofoam and big old bags of ice, and like as long as you're like, yeah, we're going to eat them sometime within the next like I will say conservatively 36 hours. Like they're like, okay, well we can get them to you by the end of the day. So order placed Saturday morning. They were here by Saturday night. Some friend of ours down at the Salt Lake area were like spent the night like flipping them every now and then, making sure that they were at least most of them were still alive and that sort of thing. And then the next day just got to cooking them. And so like so I'm driving around like a madman, and my friends are like, "Yeah, we're doing it this weekend. Drop $20 and we could do it." I was like, "Yes, okay, fine." It's another excuse to go drive my car like on to the other side of the city and back. Oh man. So I drive out there and like show up, and there's like 40 people there because everybody drops like 10-15 bucks to make it worth it, and we just had just it he's the guy that was running the thing said he had ordered enough for 3 pounds of crawdads for every person,
Holy.
which it sounds like a lot. It sounds like a
No,
lot, but you got
crawdads,
to
I know.
remember.
Yeah, but
Yeah, well, so for anybody that doesn't know, I guess I should say, is you crack open a crawdad and you suck out the meat, right? And there's not always a lot of it. So even though you got 3 pounds of crawdads in front of you, let me put an estimate out there that you're only really getting like up to a pound of meat, maybe. And that was for like the whole day of sitting around just eating crawdads. So like sitting back and eating a pound of crawdads with some friends was a hell of a fucking day. But yeah, so I spent my weekend doing all sorts of just wild shit because I just had to get out of my house. It was my weekend of getting the fuck out of here.
wow, that is a more appropriate title for the weekend than I think you possibly could have imagined.
Oh.
Yes, because this past weekend was my weekend of getting the fuck out of here. Though rather than act like a tiny Roomba that would go where the dirt was and then return to my charging station,
Yeah.
I have had full efficacy of the vaccine, and I am deathly afraid of what it will be like when we have to go back to the real world. Um,
Yeah.
so I decided immersion therapy is the only way that I'm going to get over these mountains of fears and anxieties about living in a post COVID-19 world. And
And
even that phrase right there is not entirely correct because COVID-19 is far from over worldwide. And even in this country, there are places where the vaccinated rate is below 30% for the state. And yeah,
yeah, I mean,
so
we're sitting here on the verge of a hundred nurses at a Houston hospital suing the hospital because they had the nerve to say you can't come back to work until you're vaccinated. Like nurses at a hospital, and they were like, nope, no, that's infringing on our rights, god damn it. Now I had to check because I was like 100 people sounds like a lot, but it's a hospital. That could go either way. So I looked it up, and it is a hospital that employs like 26,000 people. So this is literally like less than a percentage of nutbags at this place that are like, even though we work around sick, deadly sick people all day, like deathly, not deadly. They're not in there with like knives coming at them. Well, some of them might be, I guess, but like deathly sick people all day. And they're like, no, we don't want to get the vaccine. We don't want to be guinea pigs, which is the most bullshit excuse ever. But yeah, man, like things aren't great right now when it comes to the vaccine.
Things are great, but a friend of mine who lives down in North Carolina, they were coming back up here to the north, and they're like, I really wish I could have company for this 12-hour drive from North Carolina, because the only way I can do it is to drive. There's just too much stuff that I'm bringing with me to like fly and then have it shipped. The cost would bankrupt me. So I'm like, well, let me see how much a plane ticket is. So I could fly down to North Carolina, a 90-minute flight for $200. And I did that. And then I'm like, and then I'll drive back to New England, 12 hours. And that right there was the hardest thing to get over. And when that's the hardest thing to get over, I'm not even considering the fact that I'm going down into a part of the country where I think North Carolina, the person I was with, was telling me the only reason that they got vaccinated because they work from home and they weren't going out. They wanted to wait and make sure that like higher priority people had gotten the vaccine before they went out there. Sure. When they announced that they were going to be shutting down the mass vaccination sites due to lack of interest, that was then they scheduled their appointment. And as ridiculous,
what's wrong with you people? Get out there.
As ridiculous as that sounds, that was in April that was the discussion. So yeah, it's one of those things that like after the fact, I have to remind myself, as good as you're feeling, because that, as far as immersion therapy goes, really worked for me. Like going down to places where I'd be in a store and I'd be the only person with a mask outside of my traveling companion was kind of crazy. And wondering like, oh, if somebody makes a comment like, why are you wearing a mask? The thought is either going to be, you're stupid because you're vaccinated and you don't need it anymore, or you're stupid because you haven't been vaccinated. That mask, as we slowly moved up the country, meant a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And it wasn't until a Love's on the Pennsylvania-New Jersey border that we stopped at a gas station that had a sign that said, masks are required for all guests. So
yeah, it's one of those things that like because people can never think of themselves, right?
Right.
But that idea of that choice being taken out of your hand is such a relief sometimes. And like to some people that sounds crazy that I just said that, but it really isn't. Like being in the position, like you said, like being in this weird position of like, I don't know what kind of statement I'm now making because you fuckers turned it into a statement. Like, I need that removed, please. I need that part of the equation to not be handled by me, please. And that must have been such a relief.
Yeah, like I'm okay, cool. But then also we stopped at a Dunkin' Donuts later on, and we're the only, and that was like in New Jersey right before we got to the Tarrytown and the Tappan Zee Bridge. Yeah. And they looked at us like, why do you have masks on? As they're making our food, and there's like a good amount of people eating in the Dunkin' Donuts. And I'm like, you can't win. Like what I saw as I journeyed through 10 states this weekend is just how different each state is approaching it. But and the best thing is that when you're out in the world, you're a little on edge, right? And the worst offender is we went to a Wawa in Virginia. Can I just say hooray for Wawa? It's amazing. Like, all of the things you read, Kate Winslet saying that Wawa changed her life, she's not wrong. It is, I got a 10-inch cheesesteak sandwich with garlic aioli and melted cheddar. Not cheddar cheese sauce, but cheddar, and they got that cheddar to melt to a consistency that frankly, I thought was not possible by food sciences. Like, there's a reason. The reason America invented American cheese is because all other cheese wasn't melty enough. So, and to eat that sandwich that I got at a gas station and it be the best thing that I ate all Saturday in terms of the quality of the food and just the cook of it, that's all great. But also at that Wawa, there was a dude who just open mouth sneezed right at the food preparation counter. It was a customer, not someone working, thank God. And then like he goes, "Oh, it's all right. It's just allergies." And it's like, no, it's not all right.
No,
You gotta cover your mouth. And
yeah,
and
even if it's not COVID, man, there's other shit out there.
like, and it was, you could have heard a pin drop in the wake of that sneeze, cause it was mighty. But yeah, that's it. So it was.
Well, the Utah way of wearing the mask, by the way, just to like put a cap on that, is the choice seems to be the mask on but on the chin, which is just like, why are you even bothering at this point? You're not pretending to wear it in any fashionable way. Nobody out here is requiring that you wear it. You thought, I'm still going to put a mask on, and then your choice was, but I'm not going to put it all the way on. Well, I don't understand. I don't understand who that's for.
I mean, everything that I'm saying, it felt safe in the car, and then I knew that like I needed to just kind of be on my toes when I was out of it. But I do want to shout out JetBlue, not a sponsor, and the flight down to North Carolina, and just how safe I felt on that. Like the in-flight entertainment was how they disinfect the airplane. And I'm sure that for longer flights, that's not all you get to watch. But when you're up there for 90 minutes, that was pretty much the bulk of the entertainment, was how we come through with electrostatic guns that shoot out the disinfectant and then make sure that it clings to the surfaces so it's killing everything. And the flight attendant, he had developed a beautiful sort of shorthand to ask you what you wanted without using his mouth. Because usually, you focus on your flight attendant when they're talking by looking at their face. And I was really impressed by like that, because I'm wearing headphones. I don't want to interact with anybody. And he comes around and he gestures drink, and I knew exactly what he meant. I was very impressed by the act of flying in this time. And JetBlue, of all people, how they had handled it. And I'm not trying to insult JetBlue in that. It's just that JetBlue kind of exists in that Spirit Southwestern hemisphere of airlines.
Let's call them alternative airlines. They are alternative airlines. They're not one of the big boys.
Right. But I mean, if anyone, I always would figure that JetBlue would be kind of at the top of that. Like they're kind of fringing between alternative and pop, just to use music as an example. But it was interesting going out and seeing the world and seeing that. And I feel a lot more comfortable, like, knowing that someday I'm going to have to reconnect with the world. I still don't know when that day will come, and who knows what's going to happen between right now when we're talking and when I do reintegrate with society. But it was necessary information for me to know that it's not as scary as you've made it in your head, right?
For sure. Yeah, man, it never is though, right? Like, and that's going to be an important thing for us all to realize. And I feel like I've had to like defend myself when I say that to people, because I slowly feel like I'm slipping to the other side of the coin, where I'm just like whole hog, like out there without a mask on, just doing my thing now. But like, I was vaccinated over a month and a half ago. Like on top of that, I took every precaution when I was told I needed to. And so like, the science now says we're probably in a good place to do this. I'm going to do it. Like, I need to, for my own health and my own sanity. Because it's not that for the last year I have disagreed with the idea that staying inside can affect your mental health. Wearing a mask can definitely shape the ways in which like you go about your daily life and stuff like that. I agree with all of that. The problem was none of that mattered compared to the benefits of wearing a mask, to the benefits of staying inside, to the benefits of like, yes, of course there are ups and downs to all of this, but guess what? When the pro is you live through the year, it's kind of hard to beat that, no matter the con.
Not just you live through the year, the people that you interact with hopefully live through the year.
You care about. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's just, it was so now, like, I hope I don't sound like a hypocrite in the ways in which I'm just like, yeah, I went to a party this weekend with 40 people. I drove around. I went everywhere I could, any chance I got this weekend. But like, that's not me being hypocritical. At this point, I am vaccinated and the science says I'm good to go. I'm following the science just like I always have.
Yeah. And I'm certainly not going to say, I can't believe you did that, Sejohn. Podcast over. You're doing, everybody's going to approach this the same way. Like, personally, I think that the whole marketing for Quiet Place 2, that you have to see it in theaters, I disagree with that. Mostly because I feel like A Quiet Place 2, in the wake of a pandemic, is going to be even harder to swallow as entertainment. Because now we know that if a Quiet Place event ever happened, that 50% of the people would be like, no, I'm listening to Van Halen. I'm not being quiet. Fuck you. Sorry, John Krasinski. I still liked License
I think he's okay.
to Wed. Yeah. Oh, he's great.
One.
All right. So that's this last weekend, sort of summed up in 20 minutes. Let's go to the list of stuff we did in May. And again, you got the short straw. Sejohn, you see this list in front of us. What do you want to start with?
Well, let's talk about some TV stuffs, because I feel like that's just going to be just kind of a hit list within a hit list here, because we got to just some of these are surprises, some of these are not. So TV, who our Lord and Savior for the past year, because we've all been stuck inside, has suddenly realized it's not going to survive.
Yeah, and I think that's a great jumping off point to where I want to focus on. So the list that you see in front of you, the first 3 shows have something in common. Do you know what that something in common is?
Were they all? Are they all shows that went on after one of their like leading like acting forces left the show?
That is correct. And it represents a show from ABC, NBC, and CBS. So if you're at home, I hope you've made your guesses, but the shows that I wanted to start talking about are American Housewife, Superstore, and Mom. Mm-hmm. And these are 3 shows where an actor or actress on them found outside success from the show, probably because of the show, but they choose to ignore that and say, no, I want to get out there and I want to take advantage of the fact that I have a high Q number right now and see what else I can book. So
I would argue with the idea that they ignore the fact that the show's the reason they got there. I just think that after so many years on some of these shows that people are just like, I have the potential here to not be doing this anymore. I'm going to take it. And nobody should be begrudged that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely 2 ways to look at it, especially like American Housewife, where I'd like to start. Julia Butters, she's a child actress. I can't imagine that she's more than like 12, 13 years old, where she is in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Quentin Tarantino and rocks it. Like, her scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one of the like standout moments in it. Acting against Leonardo DiCaprio and kind of acting him under the table. It's impressive. It's an impressive thing. And I can see how just playing the quirky kid character on this show, I want to be able to spread my wings. I don't want this to be the only thing that I'm known for. And especially alongside that, a child actor's contracts are more malleable than any other contract, because
they have to be. Aren't they?
Exactly.
By law,
they have to be.
They can't be contracted for like the rest of their life. Like it's illegal.
Yeah, it's illegal. But a contract
do
for
that
like
to adults though.
An adult, you're committed to 7 seasons. Whether this show is successful or not, we own your ass for the next 7 years. But kids, I mean, you're here for half the season. Maybe. If it does well and you decide you want to stay, we'll take you back. So that one, less so. But, they replaced it with Giselle Eisenberg, who was on Life in Pieces for 4 years and then was able to transition over to that. And they handled the absence of the one actor who's now being played by another actor very, very well, in the fact that kids grow up, and as they grow up, they change. And I actually think that American Housewife was kind of happy to be able to have a different actress there so that they could pivot away from the weird daughter stuff that Julia Butters had come to represent.
Was it a little like Vegas Vacation style? Like Chevy Chase basically looks down the barrel of the camera and is like, "Damn, kids look different every year, don't they, honey?" Like, what do you...
She came running down the stairs as she's like, Anna
Cosby Show
Cat, come
style.
down, running down the stairs, different actress. And Katie Mixon, who played Katie Otto in the show, looked dead at the camera and said, "Kids change. What are you going to do?" And that was the only acknowledgement of it.
Golden. I mean, like you either acknowledge it or you don't. And like, what is it? Is it the one I'm thinking of is Modern Family, when they trade the baby out at some point for a little bit of an older actress so they can actually start getting some lines out of her.
Yeah.
They don't ever acknowledge it, and it works fine because it's just a baby, and then it's it's a toddler.
It's
so
a toddler.
so it works okay. But there's that way to go about it, or there is this way, and then it's a choice.
It works so well with Modern Family that my parents still don't believe that two different sets of people played Lily in Modern Family.
Any point of Lily having a line is not the same baby from the first 2 seasons of that show.
Yeah. So, but they don't believe that. Every time I'm like, that's a different actor. No, it's not, Devin. You're wrong. They had the same actor the whole time. I'm like, they really didn't, guys. I mean, I guess kind of, because those babies were just sort of babies.
Yeah, they didn't really act. They didn't say anything or react to anything. They were just there. You might as well would have had a plastic doll if it wasn't going to look weird.
Right. But then American Housewife also has a secondary wrinkle, and that is with Katie's 2 friends, played by Ali Wong, and I'm so mad that I can't remember the actress who plays Angela. The actor who plays Angela, because I love her. She was consistently one of the better parts of the show. Oh my God! Could you look up her name, please? Especially what I'm talking about. What was that?
Already on it.
Okay, thank you.
Ali Wong, and are you talking about McDonald? Like who are you looking at? What's the character?
The character's name is Angela.
Oh, Carly Hughes.
Carly Hughes. Thank you. I really wish that, because every time I'd say Carly Hughes is a treasure, and then Carly Hughes leaves the show in the 5th season as well, but because of allegations of racism and being treated poorly by the producers of the show, which that's not a good look for the show. So then, obviously, they're also on some thin ice for that. But then Ali Wong, in the first half of this final season, is relegated to only being a character represented on Zoom calls, before eventually she is replaced as well. And the weird thing is that they replaced her 2 friends, who were an African American and an Asian American, and the African American Carly Hughes character was a homosexual. They decided to replace Carly Hughes with Holly Robinson Pete, and they replaced Ali Wong with Jake Choi. Only, just to mix things up, now Jake Choi is playing a homosexual.
So they didn't change the... They changed the characters, but they basically slotted in the same. I mean, let's call it what it is: tokenism.
Yeah,
yeah.
So I mean, that right there, that's the thing where I'm like, all right. So they made the Giselle Eisenberg switch work, and not only did they make it work, I actually think the show's going to get better because of it. But it doesn't change the fact that they're mired in a lot of racial issues for a show premiering in 2020, playing through 2021. So I'm not super surprised that it ended up getting canceled, but it is one of those ones that ended up losing somebody who was there from the beginning and then had to go bye-bye. And I feel like maybe if they hadn't lost 3 actors with what they were doing, maybe the show would have survived.
I mean, what that says to me is dialing back the conversation we were having.
Yeah.
I think the kid had it right getting out when they did.
I hope so. I think you're right.
That might prove to be something super, some very good business style forethought on that kid, or at least that kid's agent's radar, the ability to see what's coming down the pike and be like, we're getting the fuck out of here. You did a Tarantino movie. We are moving out.
We are using that. Yeah, it's one of those situations where, but it's hard not to look at it in that conversation of, was this canceled because of the show or because of the pandemic? Which is, now I'm going to jump over to Mom, who in its 8th season lost Anna Faris as Christy, maybe the titular character? I don't know. I watched Mom. We began watching Mom in March of this year, and were able to burn through all 8 seasons to the fact that we had watched the last one we had the day before the finale aired. So I was proud of myself for that. That felt like a feat of television heroism.
Yeah. I'm interested in your questioning whether or not she's the main character of that show.
Well, because if she's the main character of that show, when she leaves,
Yeah.
how does the show survive? And the
Yeah.
focus then shifts to Bonnie, who is played by Allison Janney. But then I wonder if Allison Janney being Christy's mom the whole time, she was always sort of the main character. And certainly watching the show from the beginning, that first season, there's a lot of focus on Christy and what she has to deal with. But as the show goes on, it pairs away, and her 2 children are basically out of the picture by the 4th season. The 5th season intro is no longer anything related to her family. It is just Christy, her mother Bonnie, and then the people that they go to AA with are featured in the opening. And then by the end of it, when Christy is gone, it's really just these 5 women who met each other through AA trying to get through life together. And the show weirdly becomes better without Christy there. And it's unfortunate, but it's like I said with Julia Butters, that character, that Anna Cat being like stuck in I'm a kooky weirdo and not really being able to move past that, because when you look at this actor, that's all you see. Christy's character was so infantilized in Mom. Like, it was such a case of arrested development that eventually, as you watch all of these older actors, and it's Allison Janney, and eventually Kristen Johnson comes in, and Jill is played by My Name is Earl's wife, Jamie Presley. I don't know how I get to Jamie Presley from that. And then sorry. I don't know who played the other 2. I don't know the names of those actors who played Marjorie and Wendy. And their stories are constantly moving on and growing up. And that sort of Christie's story, she becomes a lawyer. She goes to law school. She becomes a paralegal, and she's studying to be a full-fledged lawyer. But still, a lot of the comedy relies on her being a child in moments. Yeah. And I think that was killing the show. So then to watch a season of the show without it, it was reverse Scrubs season 9 syndrome.
Okay, yeah.
Like, oh, the show has finally become its perfect cell form. And then to hear that it was ending, that one specifically felt like we don't think that we can keep this show going without Anna Faris, but we had already said we're doing an 8th season.
See, it's interesting to me because I feel like 20 years ago, that would have been a spin-off, maybe like Mom's, like plural, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like that. So it almost feels like they were trying to kind of backdoor a new series in that last series, unlike the American Housewives stuff, where it seems like what they're trying to do is retool the main concept of this show. It really feels like it flips itself on its head a little bit in that last season, for Mom to be more of a focus on the older female crowd in that, which is interesting, but like, that feels like there's a separation there between those 2 shows in a way that would have merited something like a spinoff, in a way that it feels very different from what you were talking about with American Housewives.
Right, exactly. But it is another example of, these are the shows that it was strange to me that they got canceled, because it's like, well, at the time when you lost the person who was the show, why didn't you cancel it then? Looking at the ratings that they got canceled with now, it's not like there was any shift upwards or downwards between them. They were pretty much on the same line. And you have to wonder how much behind the scenes goes on with that.
I wonder how much of this stuff, like, what do you know about this in terms of filming? Like, is this the kind of thing where, because of COVID, a lot of things got backburnered. And what I mean by that is like we didn't get a slate of like a bunch of new stuff this year because anything that would have been was kind of just like pushed, right? So it almost feels like these were none of the like it feels like there's so much of a band-aid here. We didn't want to have another writers strike season
Yeah.
happen to us like happened all those years ago. Jesus, I can't believe at this point, what was that,
14
like
years
12
ago.
years ago, 14 years
14
ago?
years ago. It was
That's
2007.
nuts. But like not wanting to have another incident of that, another bunch of like unfinished shit, and bunch of the short, everything got shorted. Some shows just completely changed, and rather than have that, like let's just kind of like push these shows too far because they've got built-in audiences, and we'll figure it out next year. So it almost feels like we're giving way too much credit to the idea that they thought they were going to save these shows. It really feels like all they were trying to do was just like keep them plugged in a little bit longer before they yanked it.
That's an interesting theory, and especially when I considered that these three were ones that were in production, had to stop production because of COVID, then went back into production, and then had to stop again because of COVID. These shows, they had weird moments to also retool their final seasons in the wake of it, which brings us to Superstore, which is kind of the weird outlier because it's a shortened season. It's not the 24 episodes that a season of Superstore is usually. It's only 13 episodes long. And the first episode does not wrap up the cliffhanger from the season before. They do a full episode, and we talked about it. Yeah.
They've always done weird shit with their timelines and episodes and season finales and comebacks and all that shit. You remember
the Olympics episode? Yeah,
the Olympics episode
that has to be
an
canon.
Entire cast of people that we knew were no longer there.
Yeah, I mean Mateo, and is where it introduced that Mateo is an illegal immigrant, which becomes a huge plot point. But so much else in that episode is like, no, this never happened. This happened in a different universe, except for that one really big important thing that's going to become that character's whole story arc for the 6 seasons of the series. But America Ferrera leaves, and that first episode is just about reopening the store, because it's like a Walmart, in the wake of COVID and what that means. And then the second episode resolves the cliffhanger, and you think that her Amy character is gone, and then by like episode 8 she's there for the last 5 episodes. So it's like you saw, there ain't no work going on because of COVID, and you're like, well, the show's ended, you want me back? It just, these 3 things were such a weird example of creating television in the pandemic and in the wake of the pandemic. And I'm a little disappointed that they all kind of succeeded with what they were doing. Like by the end of it, I was engrossed in what the shows had become. And then to see that they all end. And I mean, American Housewife ended with Katie revealing that she was pregnant, which is just like an awful reveal to end the show on. Everything else was great. Like, the oldest daughter was getting married. The youngest daughter was engaged to her first boyfriend to be married as soon as they're old enough, right? So end it with a wedding. And then the middle son realized his goal of going to Harvard, that doesn't need to be the end-all be-all. Success can exist in different ways.
Right.
So, like, all the kids get these beautiful resolutions to long-standing story arcs from the beginning of the series. And then, like, Sam Beckett never made it home. I'm pregnant.
Weird.
Yeah.
Man, I will say, like, in defense of American Ferrera on Superstore, like, you got to remember, like, she helped create that show. Like, she was an EP on it from day one and all that. Like, and she is, outside of acting on television, like a huge proponent and push. Like she's a big force behind like getting others like other people's into the business, right?
Right.
And so like the rounded out like beautiful cast of Superstore is not solely on her shoulders, but like largely in part because of somebody like America Ferrera walking in the room and being like, you can have my money to make this show, but there's going to be some rules about how we do this, right? And so I can definitely see a situation where she wants to leave the show, she wants to walk away, and then COVID happens. That season goes through a bunch of shit, and they're like, fuck, we got to end this. We got 5 shows, and she's still in the room as an EP, as far as I know. Just because she left the main story, she's still in as a producer on that last season. And so like if she's still there and she sees that they're going through this whirlwind and they don't know what to do with it, I could very easily see her stepping in and being like, all right, once we have these 5 shows figured out, these 5 episodes figured out that we're going to use to just end this whole thing, I will step back in for this moment to just basically, if anybody's going to shoot Old Yeller, it's going to be me, right?
I can understand that. It just, but it does. It just nicely rounded it out to see how these 3 networks approached their, like, there were big changes at the beginning of it, and then how it ended. I mean, Superstore we knew was ending from the beginning. Mom, they announced it was the last season, like nearly halfway through, and then American Housewife, as soon as the last episode aired, they're like, it's canceled. We should have said so beforehand. We probably should have let these guys wrap this up, like, and not thrown a curveball in there to hope that they'll renew us because of that curveball. But the last thing I want to say on Mom, and then we have so many topics, we should move past this. This has been good. Is Mom really had big designing women energy, and I miss that. I miss that type of thing being on TV, and I'm kind of sad that I wasn't there from the beginning just because of that. So I can't wait to see what the next like female-led comedy is going to be, because I'm ready for it after seeing how good Mom was able to be.
Yeah, man. So we've done some TV's stuff. We should move on to maybe some movies stuff.
Yes, movies. This will be quick, rapid fire. I'd like to hit all the classics that we've done in the house.
Let's do it.
In May, starting with The Untouchables. The 1989 Kevin Costner, Gene Hackman, the other guy, you know the other
Sean
guy,
Connery.
Sean Connery.
How could you? Oh my god.
Andy Garcia, and the nerd from American Graffiti. I really wish I knew that actor's name, but seeing him, I'm like, good for you, getting into another ensemble piece as the same character. But then he gets to blow a guy away with a shotgun, and I'm really good for you, right? That was just a great movie. I can't believe I had never seen it before. It really works, and it still holds up.
Oh yeah, still do. Well, I mean, that's one of the best parts about doing a period piece. I mean, like, is that by doing something out of time, it is so easy. I won't say that it's a guarantee, but it is so easy for it to then become timeless. You know, it's why you're able to go back and still watch The Godfather, right? And things like that, is because there's not a moment where you cringe because like. As just a counter to this, I watched Sister Act 2 recently, and it does not hold up because it is so of its time in the early 90s, and I mean specifically 2. Sister Act is a classic, and I won't touch that. But Sister Act 2, I think, has a lot of issues because it is so of the moment it was made, whereas Untouchables is made in 87, but it is of the 50s, right? Am I getting the time period right on that?
It's the 20s.
The 20s.
It's Al Capone
So, like,
and bootlegging.
So yeah, we're already like 50, 60 years out at that point. So like you're already like so in terms of it holding up, I'm not surprised you say that. I loved that movie when I was younger. Like, it's been a long time since I've sat down and watched it, but I remember loving the hell out of that movie.
It is.
And I'm not a Costner fan.
Oh, I am. I'm a huge Kevin Costner fan.
I don't dislike him. It's not like I like run away from a movie just because he's in it, but he's not the reason I go to a movie. Let me put it that way.
I get that. I can totally understand it. I think what I really liked about The Untouchables, as lame as this is going to sound, is that I'm very familiar with Homer versus the 18th Amendment, where they put in a prohibition in Springfield, and I didn't realize just how much a cartoon remake of The Untouchables, that episode of The Simpsons, is until I finally saw The Untouchables.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some moments like the baby carriage going down the stairs. that's a little ridiculous and gratuitous. But Andy Garcia is there, and he's a beautiful person. I actually just found my DVD of Lost City, that movie that he made set in Cuba,
Yeah, the
because
like black and white one.
yeah, that like because I want to watch it again because he's just showed up so much, and that of the movies we watched in our Cuban cinemas class, that's the one I lied about seeing. I'm not gonna lie now,
With
what,
Bill
20 years
Murray as the
later.
comedian.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
a
man, I
real
remember that.
weird movie that
Yeah,
Andy
really
Garcia
weird.
produced and directed with assistance from the Cuban government.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
So
Man.
Untouchables, thumbs up. And speaking of, I know it because of The Simpsons, we watched Cape Fear, but not the 1991 Cape Fear. We watched the
What?
original from 1962.
Oh, okay. I thought you were about to tell me you watched some like A&E like made for TV movie version like from like the 2000s.
No, we watched the one where Atticus Finch basically gets to play the role of not Robert De Niro.
Mhm.
And I couldn't tell you who plays the crazy Sideshow Bob stalking him guy, but he's just a barrel of a man. Like he's a mountain of. It's so good. That first Cape Fear is really really good, but I understand why it has been supplanted by Martin Scorsese's 1991 remake, which I
Yeah.
also have not seen. I've only seen the Cape Fear episode of The Simpsons, but there's some iconic imagery in that episode that was not present in the original version from 62, that those it's iconic to me because of an episode of The Simpsons. But that being said, it's worth a watch because the story of a guy you put away stalking you and being so aware of the law that you can do nothing about it, that's
Mhm.
just scary. There's no other word for it. It's
Well,
scary and it's thrilling and
and then in the 90s we do like a comedy version of it with What About Bob?
yeah, that's very true.
it's, yeah, man, it's a fucked
Yeah.
up story, and it's again classic because like it's just so timeless in that the what they're talking about in that is so pure. Like it's a revenge story. It's a family like thriller. Like there's yeah, man, you're
Yeah.
hitting them out of the park so far.
Yeah, these are good. So then the next one we did was Sunset Boulevard, which is another film that I never watched, but I always wanted to watch
Hmm.
because every film course I have ever taken, I had to watch Double Indemnity. And also every film course I've ever taken, I've been the only student who is familiar with Double Indemnity before the class. So I got a little tired of Double Indemnity, I'm not going to lie. But
All right.
um the screenwriting class that I took where you picked me up from Providence, then we went and saw the Brothers Solomon. This
Nice. Yeah.
That's how that day
Okay.
went. He actually made us buy the script for Double Indemnity, and it's almost impossible to get that script alone. It comes in a 2-pack with the script for Sunset Boulevard, and I always wanted to see Sunset Boulevard because of that, because I wanted to read the script. Because watching Double Indemnity as many times as I have, to then read the script, you get to see like how one becomes the other. But the unfortunate thing is, I thought that Sunset Boulevard was that sort of gritty detective film noir story. I didn't realize how much, well, like, let's just say it, it's Oscar bait. It's a movie about Hollywood for
Yeah,
the
no,
Academy to
it's like the
consider.
original. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the original movie about making movies. And you call it like gritty noir, and I think and I like in my head like the scenes that I'm remembering are of that too, right? But there is like this weirdly like I've also seen it on stage, so maybe
Yeah.
that's part of where my reading of it's coming from. There's like a weird amount of comedy to it that it like
But like the
that if you really want to lean into it, it can be quite funny. Like I'm not saying it's a laugh out loud comedy. It's like basically it's like watching like Death to Smoochie, you know what I mean? Like there's like a dark comedic element to it that in the wrong hands is like horrific, but in the right hands can be hilarious. Or the Coen brothers do it perfectly. Like what's the one that they do where Brad Pitt gets shot in the head? Um
so
uh
Burn After Reading.
Burn after reading. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And when Pat Oz, hey, this secret third star of this episode, me and him went to go see that together, and we were the only two people in the theater laughing in a full theater. But we were the only two people laughing at that movie, and we walked out with just smiles on our face, and everybody else was miserable.
Yeah, that's a fun movie. In fact, that recommendation from you two is why I went to go see it immediately alone.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you think it's fun being the only two people laughing, try being the only one person laughing at a movie
yeah.
that
But
nobody else thinks is a comedy. That being said, and this is a little bit of the thing, when I went to go see Hail Caesar, it was at the
mhm,
Dirt Theater in East Providence, RIP, East Providence 10. And it was
mhm.
just me and this little old woman in the theater. It was just the two of us. And I don't know if you've seen Hail Caesar. It's fantastic. Hail Caesar is a
Yeah.
very funny movie, and it's very well made. And after the movie, this old woman comes over to me and she goes, "What did you think of that?" And I said, "I really liked it. I'm surprised how much I liked it because I didn't think that based on the trailers, it would be very good. And here I am, like, proven wrong." And she goes, "Me too." And I had this beautiful conversation, and I was so happy to have been sharing a theater, watching a Coen Brothers film with another
Yeah,
person who got it,
yeah, yeah,
who
yeah.
like was ready and able to discuss it. But then going back to Sunset Boulevard, it feels like it was almost satirizing that type of film noir style to tell
Yeah.
a not gritty detective story.
Hmm.
Like, and also, I mean, I joked about it. I understand so many references now. So many things in TV and movies start with the dead person in a pool.
I was gonna
Archer
say,
feels like the
like the
most
Archer
recent
has
one.
it, yeah,
Yeah.
but also American Dad has an entire episode dedicated to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, Archer just like for a full season rips the story off in
Yeah.
such a beautiful way. Yeah,
And then American Dad also has a second episode that does the whole Sunset Boulevard thing again, where the woman believes that Stan is her reincarnated husband. And they
right.
also get a little jab in there at the whole Natalie Wood incident.
Oh
It's
man.
fun. Like, but it is like, so seeing these things that were able to lay the foundation for tropes was lots of fun. I'm gonna skip the next movie because it was my favorite of the 5 we watched in May, and I'm gonna talk about Glory and how Glory has not aged well. And
Well, in what way? I mean, it's a horrible story to begin with, but
it's a horrible story to begin with, but then the things that it chooses to focus on in terms of what people are going through in that movie. I mean, like, there's a level of minstrelsy almost at work with how the African American actors are portraying their characters.
yeah.
Like it.
Who's the director on that one? It's
Oh, I don't know that.
hold on, let me pull that up.
Unfortunately,
No, let me pull that up because I know what you're talking about, and
yeah,
it's a critique that gets levied against that film a lot is that in retrospect, it is problematic. There's a I'm trying to think of the right term for it because there is a term in like criticism like literature for the idea of like basically you think you're doing the right thing, you think you're being a good person, you're holding up this sense of otherness, but really all you're doing is it's another form of racism because you're just putting them on display, right? And oh man, let me
yeah.
get the director on
But
this
what I will say
because
is, while you're looking up
yeah,
the director of it,
Edward Zwick.
oh, Edward Zwick, Tim Zwick called my house today. That was a wrong number, but I just remember reading it on my caller ID. So that's weird, right? Do you think they call after you've watched Glory? Was it 14
Zwick family.
days?
Yeah.
The Zwick family contacts you?
But the guy also did Legends of the Fall.
Yeah.
Just to give it like Shakespeare in Love is one of his like, oh, that's okay. Yeah, he becomes a producer on like a bunch of weird stuff. So Shakespeare in Love, Last Samurai, right? Like he's all over the place. And Glory is kind of his card to like walk in the room and be like, everybody loves me. I made Glory for a few years.
I will say, my thought process was, this movie's been out for 32 years. I never saw it. You know what could have gotten me to watch Glory in a second? Like, if I was hanging out with somebody and they say, "Hey, you know that movie Glory? Did you know?" And I'd be like, "Shut up. We're watching Glory right now." I had no idea that Carrie Elwes was in that film.
Oh yeah,
I knew
yeah.
about
As
Matt
the
Broad,
asshole, right?
but I mean, kind of as the asshole, but not really. Like, he represents the one who realizes and like learns that, well, if we're gonna treat them like soldiers, we have to treat them like soldiers. Like,
Yeah.
he weirdly pushes Matthew Broderick to actually make a stand because he's like, you can't have it both ways. You got mad at me when I was drunk and said, do you really want this command? And now you're getting mad at me because I see these guys want to fight and the army does not want them to fight.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
he's this weird emotional heart to the film. And like, ditto the like hard ass drill instructor that they bring in. McElroy is his name. I don't know why. I can't think of the actor who plays him or anything like that. But McElroy comes in and he's like treating him harsh, like he's saying a lot of hard things. But then I'm thinking, but this is how drill instructors are portrayed in media, right? This is only two things from Texas, steers and queers, and I don't see any horns on you, boy. Like, it's that level of it. And then there's that moment where he goes to call out one of the soldiers, and he's like, don't you know your left from your right? And he goes, no, I don't. And in that moment, he like changes and realizes, like, I want to make these men combat ready, but I didn't realize how like non-life ready they are just because of where we put them in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And like, those are things that like kind of weirdly worked for me, but it felt like those were accidents. It did not feel like.
I mean,
like,
it's one of those movies that is so of its time, and like I'd like to think that we've gotten better at making these kinds of films, right? But you take you take a bunch of white producers and a director that want to tell this black story, and as we pointed out, as recently as like with Remember the Titans, it still doesn't quite hold up, right? So it's weird because like in its moment it is hugely important, but like after a while you have to remember that we don't make movies like that anymore. And I think it's just a victim of progress, right? At some point, like, progress means we have to move away from even the things that were progressive at one point. It's sad that it doesn't hold up, but I'm not surprised.
yeah, and like there are moments in it that like are supposed to be shocking, and I'm like, we know that far worse things happened during that time and are happening right now. Like, it's interesting that you bring up Remember the Titans, because that was my big thought watching the film, is every few years a film like this is released by Hollywood, really just talking about how the media is trying to represent perception, and far more than this catch-up episode. Like, we need more time if we're actually going to sink our teeth into this, because it felt very Remember the Titans. Like, look how good we were back then. That's how good we can be now.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. But
I
we're
mean,
not.
at best, Glory Now is just a really good movie for teachers to show fourth grade classes, to then talk about like the big moment at the end, like, and then they all got buried together, which also is not true, by the way. But it's more of a teaching tool at this point than it is a cinematic feat.
Well, I mean, it's more of a teaching tool from the beginning, when you consider that, like, they really want to push the fact that it's his letters, right? That it's all written based upon his letters home. But then there's like 4 sources that parts of that story are taken from. So there's a reason why it doesn't have the based on a true story tag at the beginning of that movie, because no, it's not. And we didn't think we could get away with trying to tell you that.
Yeah. So what was the last one, man?
The last one was Witness. And I tell you right now, I would watch Witness anytime. Like, it's not Hacker level, but it's pretty close to Hacker's level. Witness turned me into a raw nerve in terms of my emotions. Because from moment like 4, right? Like when Harrison Ford and her go to the coffee shop and you realize, oh, there's going to be a love story between them. And that love story is not going to work out because she is Amish and he is Han Solo. Like, you like, every moment that they become closer, you know that it's not going to last. but like I was still so invested in it. Like I'm not a big fan of tacked on love stories, but if the love story is your whole story, you gotta commit in the way that Witness committed to their love story.
Oh, it's a romantic thriller. Like
Yeah.
there's no doubt about that for sure. I mean, that's such a huge part of it. Is he goes undercover and he goes too deep. Is like that entire story.
But like it's not that he goes
Man,
undercover, he's forced into hiding. Like
yeah,
it's not like the police say, "All right, go act like an Amish person on the farm." There's nowhere else for him to go because he realizes the only people that I trusted, they're the drug dealers.
yeah.
What am I supposed to do? Mr. Ducksworth from Mighty Ducks is the bad guy, and he was my mentor.
Man, yeah. Well, and one of the other things about this movie is like it's a Harrison Ford like classic, and it really it's one of those movies that defines an actor's career. Like without Witness, I don't know if people would look at Harrison Ford the same way, because you joked about Han Solo, but like this is one of his attempts to get away from that, right? Like this is 85, so it's right after Empire and right before Return, right?
No,
So
it's
like he's
right
still
after
kind of,
Return, because Empire is
is it?
80. Empire is 81, and
Yeah,
then
that's right. Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah. So it's right
83
after
is
Return.
Jedi. So it's right after Return of the Jedi, and this is
Hmm.
Harrison Ford saying, I'm not
I'm
just
more than
these
that.
people."
Yeah, exactly. I am more than the Star Wars franchise. And this is around the same time that you get to see him do Blade Runner. Like he does a handful of these movies to do everything he can to prove that he's more than just that. And in that, he's still embracing the parts of Solo though that are still beloved, like the sex symbol aspect, right? So he's always trying to pull off like the sexy Harrison Ford. And like it's weird because I grew up in a household in which sexy Harrison Ford was talked about, but like the Harrison Ford that I was seeing was like 6 days, 7 nights, which tries to pull off sexy Harrison Ford and Anne Heche for some weird reason, and it doesn't work. He's just fucking grumpy, and like there's this. It's like there's this like ghost of sexy Harrison Ford that kind of lingers in like the 90s and like even early 2000s, but it's gone by the time you get to like you get to late game Harrison Ford, him doing like the I just want my family back. Like,
I need a firewall. What's a firewall?
mm, what's a computer? Yeah,
But yeah,
it's and I love like octogenarian Harrison Ford being a badass. I mean, I mentioned Blade Runner earlier. Blade Runner 2049 when he shows up is awesome. Like it's just Witness is like Witness was on a shelf a little too high for me to reach in my house growing up. And then when I saw it, in like the 90s, when I finally came of an age when my parents were okay with me watching kind of, violent detective films,
there's
I
also some
understood
nudity in
why.
that movie.
Yeah.
I see nudity as being a barrier that your parents wanted to like to expose you to.
Yeah, but like late 90s when I was just kind of watching whatever I could get my hands on, and at that point I'd been seeing all sorts of shit. Like they finally let me watch Witness, and I remember like really like really enjoying that story. Yeah.
Yeah, that's solid. I really did like Witness. I cannot begin to tell you how much I liked Witness.
Did you recognize Vigo in it?
Of course, I recognized Vigo in it. I was the
Yeah,
only
see,
one of the hosts who recognized Vigo in it,
yeah,
and
I
that
was
was
gonna say
great.
it's one of those things where it's an early enough role where you kind of don't even realize it's him until you
Yeah.
see the credits and you're like, really? Yeah.
Alexander Goodenough, right before he becomes the scary blonde guy who wants John McClane dead. Like I was just like
Yes.
Alexander
Yeah.
Goodenough. I'm so happy to see him do something besides Carl. It
Man.
was great. It was just happy. It was just a really, really good flick. And I recommend Witness. Of the ones that I've talked about, like, all of them are kind of worth watching, even Glory for some things. But if you have to pick one movie to watch, it's Witness. Watch Witness. I'm so mad that it took me so long. I felt like I felt when I saw Commando for the first time. Because I thought it was just the action sequences that everybody talks about. But there's so much more depth in both of those films.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Okay. So where to now, Siege? You know what? I'm gonna use Anne Heche as a quick thing to the other TV stuff, and then we're done with the TV things, because Anne Heche wound up in All Rise season 2 as the police union attorney, and All Rise has been canceled, and I do not weep for All Rise. All Rise is a show that we talked about briefly on this show because this show doesn't know what it wants to be, doesn't want to be Night Court, or does it want to be The Practice. Pick a lane, All Rise. And it is one of the shows that tried to really lean into not just the pandemic, but also Black Lives Matter with its heavy, minority cast. And they told some really interesting stories that, like, I don't think TV would have ever explored if we didn't have the weird year that was 2020 into 2021 for television. But I think that every time they told a story like that or broached a topic like it, it was just them putting another nail into the coffin of the show. Because I don't think they knew where to go with it. And that's just the unfortunate thing, because a lot of conversations that kind of needed to be had, and most people start their conversation by something they see on television. I'm happy that they were brave enough to broach it, but I'm not sad to see All Rise go, because it never really knew what it wanted to be.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I don't know. It was one that never hooked me. So like, it's one of those ones where when they announced it was canceled, there was legitimately a thought in my head of like, is that really still on? like
I know, and it was only its second season. But
yeah,
the
I didn't
thing
realize
that they
it even
did,
got a season 2.
Yeah, the thing that they did was they announced its cancellation the Friday before the final episode, and I know that in my house that means I don't need to watch that episode. So it was kind of just me who watched it.
They hope it goes the other way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But a lot of times it's like, I was really invested enough. Which will bring us to Last Man Standing. Finally wraps up its strange 9-year journey of changing characters and actors out and, switching networks from ABC to Fox and all of the weird things that Last Man Standing did. And we've talked a lot about the show on the Say Report. All I really need to say about it is that there are only 194 episodes of Last Man Standing. So with this episode, we got 35 more episodes of the Say Report than Last Man Standing. In half the
Couldn't
time.
even 200, you bums, could you?
I was so like, he's like, it's been 194 vlogs, and I'm like, man, that sucks, huh? Like, I'm sad for you, Tim Allen, in this moment, because 200 would have felt like something.
Yeah. Well, when the show starts off where he's the butt of the joke, and then at some point it evolved into everybody else was the butt of the joke, they lost the thread somewhere along the line.
I have to say, though, the penultimate episode was some of the best writing in a television series I've ever seen, Baxter Boot Camp. There was a theme that all three, the A, B, and C stories really followed, and it was really well written and well acted. And then it made me sad when the finale episode, the last one, was his truck getting stolen from him, and that truck acting as the surrogate for the show being canceled. You guys just brought me to heaven, and now you're literally bringing me to hell with tropey jokes, and it's not even like it would be one thing if the truck died or if I decided to get rid of it, but it was taken from me. And I was just like,
calm down.
And one of the big problems is we have the security cameras, but the network was down. Well, can't you go to another network? That doesn't usually happen. And when it does, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work out. And I'm just like, these are too on the nose. Especially on the heels of an episode that really showed you understand this entire cast and what they're capable of. But I do hope that people rise above it. Molly Afrane. It's weird because the character she played, Molly Afrane's character, was replaced by an actress named Molly Cook because they just never wanted you to be able to differentiate between them, even though one was short and a brunette and the other one was tall and a blonde. They literally Simpsons showcased her, which is weird. But Molly Afrane, she has gone out and she has done great things. She played She was in Perry Mason. She was
Yeah.
the in that, and so I hope that Malia Frayne is able to go out and do stuff. We've already seen that Caitlin Devers has been able to rise above her role of Eve on Last Man Standing. So it'll be an interesting time in Hollywood to see where these people go, if they get other shows or if they actually are able to make the jump from television to streaming or even from television to filmmaking. But it's over. No more jokes about Last Man Standing. Thank God the Connors got a 4th season. And then the last one,
Yeah.
the last TV cancellation, NCIS New Orleans came to an end, and it was another real good payoff, calling back to things from the first and second episode season of the show, not just episode, but yeah, first episode stuff like referenced and tied together very nicely. It ended with a wedding, as all good things should. And the only
New Orleans wedding.
Yeah, they did a march down the street. There's a name for it, but I can't. A walking march, and it was awesome. It was just like a really great way to end it, because they knew that this was going to be the last season. That said, fingers crossed that NCIS Hawaii, one of these actors comes back, and as long as it's not Scott Bakula, I think I'll be okay. Not that I have any issue with Scott Bakula, but these younger actors who really like made a splash on the scene by being in NCIS New Orleans, I wouldn't mind seeing more of them.
No, it's time for him to leap into his next franchise.
Haha! I like to think that that was his leap home, was the end of NCIS New Orleans. Don Belisario was there. It has to be true. I might start watching Enterprise, just because I hate myself.
Yeah. No, everybody's got to have a thing. No, like I liked Enterprise. Enterprise is a boring show. I'm never going to argue that it's not, and that was always its biggest issue, is that it wanted to have all of the grandiose of Next Generation and none of the like fun of Next Generation. So like, really, like it aimed for 1 star and it hit it, but man, it needed to aim for more than that.
The only
Yeah,
episode I've seen of Enterprise currently is a alternate universe episode, and I'm like, this is awesome, this is what the show did. And the person I was watching it with was like, no, this is kind of a one-off sort of cool
This is
thing
what they
that
did
they
once.
did. And I'm like, oh, now I'm sad. Yeah, you should be. That's the right reaction to have to that.
Maybe we should have Zach on sometime for an all Star Trek like,
episode.
because like we could talk about all sorts of weird stuff that's happened in that universe over the last year. Between Discovery, Picard, and Lower Decks alone, we could have a hell of a show. Yeah, man. But so yeah, those are a bunch of things that just did not make it through COVID, and like so just to bring it back to the movies for one moment, we're still kind of in that weird realm where movies aren't quite sure what they can and can't be. And I think one of the last kind of vestiges of that is going to end up being Raya and the Last Dragon. I think beyond this, I don't know how much more Disney stuff we're going to see that where you feel forced to watch it on the Disney Plus app. Because I think after this, like they're really gonna have to shift to. Obviously, we're back in theaters, but hey, moms and dads, like if you can't get into a theater right now because you've got 5 kids, why don't you take the cheaper option and pay the $30 at home? And I think that is going to be a much better marketing strategy for the $30 Disney Plus add-on than the hey, you're trapped at home and we've got you by the balls, so pay $30 if you want to see a new movie this weekend, like which is really what they've been doing for the last year and a half.
I mean, the interesting thing is, they've only done it with 3 movies. Mm-hmm. And that's where it really is strange to me. And those 3 movies, and, you know, at least 2 of them I can confirm were aimed at the Asian markets. Mulan and Raya and the Last Dragon were specifically, these movies are being made so that they will make billions of dollars in the Chinese market.
I think it's important to point out, though, that that's correlation, not causation. They were not put in this position because they were films aimed at the Asian market. It just so happened that the 2 movies that they've had on their docket for years to be made in this fashion and aimed at this market just happened to fall in the COVID year. And I think that that's an important distinction to make.
I,
They didn't see COVID coming down the line and went like, quick, make Mulan so that we can make sure that everybody stuck at home has to see it. Like, I don't think that happened.
no, but I do think that the reason why those had the $30 surcharge was because they were expecting these films to make gangbusters because of the international market. Because you can't overlook the fact that Onward dropped on Disney Plus 2 weeks after it had released in theaters, right as everything was shutting down. You can't overlook the fact that Soul from Pixar just came out for free. Hamilton just came out for free on Disney Plus.
So it's interesting that you point out Onward, which is also a Pixar movie. So
Right.
that could also be part of it, depending on how those contracts are made. Because that's one of the big things that people like to forget about, like the Disney animation versus Pixar conversation, is they'll wrap all that shit up together and they'll talk about Wreck-It Ralph and Big Hero 6, and then in the next breath talk about, Inside Out and Onward and Soul. And it's just like, nope, like those are technically different houses, and like different contracts, different rules apply. And like, yeah, they're all owned by Disney, but like we need to have this, we need to talk about these in correct terms. So like I also think part of it has to do with the fact that like we're talking about Disney specific films were the ones that didn't get that free release, right? So we're talking about Raya, we're talking about Mulan, and then what was the third one?
Cruella just came to
Cruella had the $30 option for it.
And Cruella is the only one that currently still has that $30 option. Raya and the Last Dragon, as of June 4th, is free to watch if you're a Disney Plus subscriber. So if you were waiting, you didn't want to spend the money, but you are a Disney Plus subscriber, it's available now, which is why we're talking about it on the show.
And I do think you're still going to see the $30 option be available for future Disney-specific releases. Like Black Widow is going to have it, like plain and simple. You're going to have the ability to pay $30 to see Black Widow at home. And there's going to be people that take them up on that. I think that's going to be – I think that while COVID was definitely the reason that this whole – fucking ball of nonsense started, the idea of you not only have to pay the monthly fee for the app, but on top of that you have to pay $30 extra if you want to see this particular thing 2 months before it's then free on the friggin' app. Like that has always been the weird caveat at the end of that story, is that like, or you can just wait and it will be free. And they've never not said that. Now, will that part be there for, I mean, hell, will it even be there for Cruella? I don't know if Cruella has an app date yet.
Cruella does have an app date.
Okay.
The only three that were still out there that were confirmed Disney Plus and theatrical release same day was Cruella, Black Widow, and Jungle Cruise.
Yes. So they're going to be available on the app, but do Jungle Cruise and Black Widow have free release dates?
No, those two currently do not have that.
Yeah.
Which is why
I think that might be the one that the bit that you lose there.
After my road trip experience and being on a plane for 90 minutes, Black Widow might be my return to cinema now that I've proven that I can do it. Mostly because I've never not seen a Marvel film in theaters, and that feels like a weird thing to lose because of all this. And you're not wrong, right? I will, you're honest, like the Pixar stuff is completely different, but at the same time, I would really be interested to see the contracts and to see why Pixar stuff was not monetized this way. Why wasn't Hamilton monetized this way? Hell, why wasn't Artemis Fowl monetized this way?
Artemis Fowl wasn't monetized this way because if it was, I think it would have gotten shit on more, which is impossible. But I think I think they saw what was coming down the pike with that and thought, if we treat it like it's candy and it's free, kids will eat up anything. And they kind of proved that, because I know a bunch of people that saw Artemis Fowl specifically because it was there.
Yeah, but it's one of those things that I do want to see what the contracts were and how it goes going forward. But, Raya and the Last Dragon coming out, and again I knew nothing about the film. I will be the first person to say I was able to avoid anything. So sitting down on Friday to watch it, that was my first experience with it. And I was a little surprised that it was similar to Mulan in its target audience. But then also kind of learning from the Mulan lesson of let's make up our own story. Like, let's not try to use a well-known Chinese folk tale this time.
Yeah, yeah. It's so the idea of the five separate kingdoms coming together is something that's very actually predominant in a lot of Asian folklore.
Right, right, right.
We see it used to the point where even like Avatar like heavily is influenced by it, right? And things like that. So while I'm not familiar with a specific story that it is referring to, but like I mean like the idea of the five island kingdoms coming together is very big when you start talking about like the Philippines and Thailand and what
Vietnam,
Vietnam, like
Korea.
that
Yeah.
whole area. Yeah, so like that, they're also like the kingdoms and the specifically like the Shaolin families and dynasties, not dynasties, that's not the right word, but the Shaolin families and things like that of like Japan coming together and like I only have a passing loose knowledge of this, which is obvious to anybody that's listened to me babble for the last minute here, but like that is it's a lot more researched than it seems, I guess, is what I would say for a lot of what's going
Oh
on
yeah,
in that movie.
they went out there, and like a lot of the visual stuff is based on trips to um Asia and Vietnam and all these places they talk about. It influenced a lot of the style of the film, but there's not something like they're using tropes of Asian storytelling, which makes sense. That's what all movies use. But this is
Hmm.
not like there's some like 101 Dalmatians is not an original story. It's based on a children's book, and
Right.
it's become so synonymous with Disney, especially like the character of Cruella de Vil. The reason why it's the Cruella movie is because she is so Disney. She's
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
such Disney fodder that that's what they
Right.
want to protect in terms of the copyright for the character.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Um,
sure. I mean, it's the Little Mermaid conversation,
yeah,
right? When people
exactly.
are like, "Well, the Hans Christian Andersen Little Mermaid is actually this," and it's like, "Yeah, we get it. You read the book first."
Right.
But like, but that is there, right? Like that is something that cannot be ignored. Is that Disney has always kind of made it the habit of picking up a story that's already existed, most notably, usually free,
Yep.
right, in public domain, and then like doing what they want with it to the point where you think of it as a Disney thing. When I say Snow White, you think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you think of the Disney version, but that story's been around long beyond
Yeah.
that, for sure. Yeah, and so with Raya, you can't point to that. There's not a thing that they have co-opted for Raya.
Right. And they've been all about it too. They want to make sure that this is an original piece. This is like
Yeah,
Moana. This is like Brother
yeah,
Bear. And it's like, oh,
yeah.
okay. Like I get
Well, and it's interesting that you point out Moana specifically because I did get a strong feeling in learned lessons of like Disney in the past and how it approaches otherness and could be seen as appropriating certain things. So they very purposely, as you're saying, point out like we didn't steal this one. we didn't walk in and steal this from some Asian history that we then co-opted for, yeah, for sure.
and that really does feel like a response to how angry people were about Mulan, not just in 1998, but last year.
Yeah.
And not because of the real world stuff, but because of the storytelling things that, well, that just doesn't make sense based on the
Hmm.
culture that you guys are trying to shove in our face to make money.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think that my one real issue with Raya, because for all intents and purposes, I really enjoyed my time with it. We'll get to but I think the biggest thing that I have to levy against it for me as a Disney and movie watcher is that there's a lot of Raya that feels really rushed and thin because of the fact that I think they're trying so hard to not like put their foot down hard in any particular place. It feels very light throughout.
I think that that's also a symptom of the fact that, and it's written at the end of the film, this was made completely remotely. 400 individual homes became the animation studio that created Raya and the Last Dragon.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I hadn't considered that, but that definitely could be part of it as well. A large part of it. I do think that it is also they were trying so hard to be so careful about how they approach certain things. And this is not me critiquing that at all. I'm not saying they should not have. They should. They always should. Every step of the way, they should make sure that they are taking a step and making sure they didn't step on somebody. That is clear. Like that needs to be the case. I think they're just still learning, and I think this was a really good step in their learning process of being able to tell stories that don't just feature just Snow White, just reskinned to be another white princess.
Yeah, no, it really was. Like I overall I enjoyed it. But I had to remind myself that this was made remotely because there was one moment where a voice line was delivered, and I'm like, oh, that was a completely different setup and mix than the rest of this film. And
I didn't even notice stuff like that.
There was there was a moment where I'm just like, you need to not focus on that. It was, do you remember the old Incredible Hulk cartoon show from the 90s where they would show scenes with Bruce Banner debating with the gray and green Hulk in his mind?
Right.
Like how this situation needs to be handled, which type of Hulk comes out. Like it was a council of Devons in my mind of like, this movie is good. You're going to enjoy this film. You know how it was made. You can't let that define the film for you. And it's the only example I have of it, but I bet if I, watched it looking for it, I would notice other small things like that just because of, especially something like audio and it being the thing that I focused on for so long in my life. But then it comes down to the same issue I've had with a lot of recent Disney movies, which is the messaging at the end of the film that like everyone should
Well,
be...
you hate it that they've gotten complex. Every time you have this, before you say what you're about to say, I'm going to put money down that your issue is that it's too complex for kids.
I think that they oversimplify something that should be more complex. I think that, spoilers for the end of Raya and the Last Dragon, the idea is that everybody should be worthy of your trust and forgiveness. Like, that's a lovely way to live, but there are levels and layers to it, and I don't know. Like, it's just one of those situations where the big final moment, right? The final moment of, like, trust gone, right? Mm-hmm. It was very hard for me to see how Raya was responsible for Sisu being shot with the crossbow. It was very difficult for me to see that side of the argument as a 35-year-old man.
Oh, I, as a 32-year-old man, completely blamed her in that moment.
Yeah.
She could not listen. She couldn't. She was too fucking stubborn to trust in this person that she had been told to trust in by the other. No, disagree. I completely in that moment blamed her for not just fucking stepping up and just trusting when she should have.
I don't know. And I think that's it. I think that one moment didn't work for me. So then that like trust needs to be owned and you need to trust in this person who has thrice betrayed your trust was very difficult for me to be like, yeah, I guess we trust her because that's what the movie has to do to end happy. But
like, no, see, and this is what I mean is that they do this thing where they blow a concept out because it is complex, and then they try and bring it back to a simple answer when there can't really be one in the real world. And I get that, but I think that for like children's storytelling, like let's talk about this in the shittiest way we can, because this is oversimplifying, which is what we are saying to them they are doing, is oversimplifying an idea. But let's do it. The idea being that like they need to come down into a moment. They need to come down to a concept that you can still talk about, because you still need to be able to walk out and get into the car with your kid after the movie is over. And when they say, well, why this, why that? That is the conversation that needs to happen. And the problem is that for years they weren't doing that. They were giving you the answer rather than saying, go home and have a conversation. And all of these movies that they have worked on lately have put them, Pixar included in this conversation here, to also double back on a thing I said we shouldn't do. But the idea being that you then get to have that conversation. But I think it's important to point out that you say that she has thrice betrayed you, but really she's only betrayed you once. And then since then, you have not been able to meet her in any capacity. So like so the idea that when somebody betrays us in the real world, it is partly our responsibility to come halfway to meet them, to come bring that trust back, it is true. And like you can say like, well, no, she's never proven that she's worthy of it. No, she hasn't. But you've also never given her the chance. Is an important lesson to be talked about. And that is the Raya side of this story, is that yes, you can understand why she feels the way that she feels this entire time. But the idea that they are able to talk about trust being a two-way street, a complex issue, is important. And the fact that it all comes to this moment where she just has to just give it up is, yes, oversimplified, but it is a beautiful like image of that concept. It doesn't matter how many times you've been betrayed, you still need to be willing to go that extra mile. Is the only way that trust can exist is, I'm sorry, life. Like, so you could say it's an oversimplification that at the end she just has to kind of just give into it, but yep, you kind of have to oversimplify it in the real world.
So, but you touched on where my problem stems from. My problem does not stem from the fact that they do this. My issue is for so long they gave you the answer. So it makes me nervous that that conversation afterwards, discussing the complex themes that were presented in this film, might not happen.
Well, that's bad audience. That's not the movie's responsibility.
That's a good
Like,
point.
you are a smart enough human being that to know that that conversation needs to be had. You are the audience for this film, man. So like you can't lay that on the movie to say, I don't know if people are gonna get it, and all you can say is the movie gave you enough pieces of that conversation to have it. If people don't go home and have it afterwards, that's their fucking problem. Like, you can't keep like depending on the movie to hold your hand even once the movie's over. You just can't do that.
I guess I wish there was some marketing that said that. It's not on the film.
Where does that exist?
I know exactly. That's what I'm saying. I just like, I wish that these films should inspire conversation is something that I heard. I don't know. I just feel like kids films for so long just existed. I mean, especially look at the shit that we were exposed to as kids as films for us, and how like it has weirdly affected people because, you know, Judge Doom in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right? But we were told this is a kids film, right? Now that we're aware that kids entertainment can be complex and have layers, I'm just nervous for this next generation that
See,
that they're not getting
that,
the discussion.
but I think that kids' films have always been complex, and I think that they've always merited discussion when they've been good enough. The problem is that criticism of children's media had for so long not dared to see it that way, because like you just pointed out, like you pointed to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, a quote unquote kids film that has so many levels of complexity to it, in the ways in which it talks about the film industry, in the ways that it talks about race, and the ways that it talks about just the treatment of others, and the idea of justice, and the idea of innocent until proven guilty. There's so many layers to that movie that in the 90s, like, you could have that conversation on a micro level. My family did have these conversations when talking about these movies and talking about this sort of shit. And like, all credit to that goes to my dad, who at the time I thought was just being a jerk and like over questioning stuff. But really, like, he was just willing to talk about these movies in the conversations that they wanted to have, in a way that like society maybe told us we weren't supposed to be. And you've gotten so in your head about the idea that we were told to not talk about movies that way, that like you didn't, like, you thought you were weird for talking about movies that way. I got news for you, Dev. You weren't. Like the filmmakers' art has always been political. This is the same conversation that goes on nowadays when people are like, I wish they wouldn't keep putting politics in my video games. And it's like, no, man, that's always been there. You just were told you weren't supposed to talk about that stuff, so you didn't. And I'm sorry whoever hurt you in that way, because they were wrong.
I guess it's because, since you referenced your father, it's the fact that when I would try to have more complex conversations with this stuff, a lot of the times from my father, and Dennis Decker's a great man. I've learned a lot of great things from him, but now I'm seeing that maybe this was one negative thing that he kind of just dropped into the pool for me, is you're thinking too much about it. And like, that would never stop me from thinking too much about it, but it made me feel like maybe it's not something that I'm supposed to discuss with other people. And clearly I've gotten over that because
Right.
what
Well,
we're doing right
and
now, but I just I'm nervous for the kid who sees Raya and the Last Dragon and wants to have that discussion about, like, why is it okay to trust her in the end when everything we saw, and like you just said, I mean, you made me feel better by saying you need to also look at Raya and her responsibility in all of those situations where, because she was hurt once, she wasn't willing to bring 100% trust into another interaction with this person. Like, I never
and
really considered it on that level. So thank you for that. But I'm just nervous of these kids who might see the movie and have those thoughts and have a parent who says, that's not what that movie was supposed to be about. And it's specifically because of how children's media was treated for so long in this country.
well, right. But that's the big secret is like is everybody thinks that they were like the hipster that got it first, right? Like and this is and I think this is
God.
kind of maybe something that we're all kind of starting to realize about one another is we all thought we were the weird kid in the room that was really into this thing and we didn't really we thought too much about comics and so we didn't really want to talk to anybody else about comics because we were way too deep into it, and now we've all kind of slowly realized that we were all reading the same fucking comics and having the weird deep thoughts. The same thing goes for movies, the same thing goes for video games, the same thing goes for TV shows. Is we've spent all this time relegating the idea that like complex criticism of media is somehow something that only certain sects of society did, and those people deserve to be like walled off in a basement with a D&D game to talk about this shit. And then like we've all gotten to the point where we've all grown up now, and we were all kind of that mind, of that zeitgeist, that like we didn't talk to each other about this shit, and now we're finding out everybody's fucking into it. We thought for so long D&D was a thing that only like two people in class played, and we found out that nah, everybody was playing it. We all just didn't want to talk about it because we thought it was like the shit nobody did.
I mean, that's interesting. I like how you put that, and thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just
Like,
I think that's it. I'm afraid for the next generation that we're treating them. I've always been an advocate for treating the next generation like adults. John Mayer's whole "there's no such thing as the real world, just a lie we got to rise above." Like, the next generation, just because they're young doesn't mean that they're not human.
yeah,
And I just get so worried that my experience having like a mother who'd be willing to talk to me about things is so unique that it's not going to happen for somebody. And seeing something like Ryan the Last Dragon, where it's like you should trust people, or you should at least try to trust people, get over your preconceived notions of what they're going to try to do to hurt you, that could result in somebody getting hurt. But I mean, that's life. That's the big secret of life, is that anything could go bad at any time. So you just gotta hold your nose and jump in.
well, I think the important thing to remember about Raya, and the thing that I think is so beautiful, is the fact that while the takeaway from that movie is you need to learn to trust even after something tragic happens, it doesn't negate the fact that because her and her father trusted these people in the first third of this movie, shit went wrong. Right? Like it doesn't erase the fact that that happened. So trust but verify, kids, is really the lesson of that movie.
Right. I guess, but taking it in, I try to put myself into where I would have been when I saw it, at like, if I saw this as a child, what I would have remembered and what I would have taken away. And it always goes back to The Little Mermaid. And I took away the wrong message from that film. And maybe there's the wrong messages on display in that film. I don't know who to blame. But seeing it at 3 years old and then seeing it as an adult, I'm like, oh, I missed some stuff. I missed some important stuff about this movie. And
Yeah.
it's
Also, stories and concepts behind films can change depending on the context in which you see them. You know, like you watch a movie like The Little Mermaid when you're 3 years old, and you don't have the context to apply and layer things on that movie. That like now I watch that movie and I think about it as like, man, there's a lot going on here with the character of Ursula and the ways in which she is treated, and like knowing some of the weird stuff about that character, that like some of the backstory in that character is that she was actually is not was is like Trident's sister who has been like pushed out of court, and like so the ways in which she reacts to that is what leads to the way to like to her becoming like the sea witch that lives out there on her own. And so she tries to steal something back from Ariel, knowing that like that was supposed to be hers to begin with, but because of the way that she was treated by Trident and her family, that is the way that she is, right? None of that context when I was growing up, and maybe none of that context will matter going forward if they ever do like an Ursula movie and completely change that story, because none of that is shit that made it into the movie. That's just now knowing what we now know because everybody talks about that shit. We now see like, oh right, that was supposed to be what was going on there, and like writers and artists coming out being like, yeah, when we conceptualized the character, they were this, they were that, and then they became this when it was finally on screen. Like those kinds of conversations don't fucking matter when you're 3 years old watching those movies, and they don't matter when they get rewritten 30 years later by somebody else coming in and doing them. So like context and story also changes. That's also an important part of this.
I agree. Decision. Thank you for this. This. You've really kind of not turned me around on Ryan and the Last Dragon, because I was still like is worth seeing. I like 90% of this movie I find pretty enjoyable, and maybe I'll have to come to it again when like I don't have other things on my mind. But you've really given me, and we've had a lot of conversations about children's media, you've given me a real new foundation to start from. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
We are willing to sit here and rip them apart. You should trust that other people are doing the same thing, because we can't. This show is not Devon and Sejohn talk about shit that nobody else is willing to. We're not fucking Joe Rogan. We're not gonna like we're not gonna fucking ride that fucking horse and act like we're gonna be the saviors of pop culture because we're willing to have the conversations nobody else is. My hope is that people realize that by you and I having these conversations, they realize that they are not alone in having these same conversations with their friends and family.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like how you put that. I guess, and it's my fault, right? I'm coming to it from a place of being wounded. Like, you were one of the first people I found in my life who I could have these conversations with. So, like, that's important to me. Like, that's a big deal. Like, other like, think about some of the conversations we overheard and participated in when we were in college. Mm-hmm. And then, like, I thanked God that I would have to drive you home so then we could actually have this conversation.
For
and
sure.
Not that, like...
What happens, though, is that, like we have to be careful. Like, this is Sejohn and Devon now have to be careful that... Because the other side of that moment, of those moments, were those guys driving home from class and talking about how we got it all wrong. And they're not wrong. They weren't like, nobody was wrong, really. The thing is that what you and I were getting out of those things was important to us because of A, B, or C. And the things that those guys were getting out of those movies and the conversations they were having were their own things because of D, E, and F, right? And so, like, maybe watching Clerks 30 years later doesn't work for a person because of the ways that society matters, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop watching that movie. Like, because somebody that I have had conversations with has opened my eyes to this issue with that film, definitely sees that stuff, and like maybe I kind of always knew it was there. I'm still gonna go watch it from time to time because it still matters for me because of this other shit, right? And like, and we need to remember that in somebody else's story, we're the assholes, right?
Yeah.
And like, and that's just the way it is. Like,
that's beautiful. Thank you, Sejohn. Mostly for the title of this episode. But yeah, that's a good point. All right, we covered a lot of the topics that we had wanted to do, but you know, sun's getting real low, big guy. So I have a question for you before we go on, because one of the things I wanted to talk about was Biomutant, but I'm not done with Biomutant. And another topic was Resident Evil 8. Have you finished Resident Evil 8 yet?
I was gonna do a whole bit about how I finished it, and yeah, like I fought Heisenberg in the big mech, and then you know, got killed by Miranda, and I just like that was great ending for Ethan Winters. And I was gonna just do this whole bit about how I didn't then play like the last third of that game. But yes, I finished it completely.
All right, good. I'm glad. So I think let's tie this one up with a brief discussion about Resident Evil 8. Maybe not the last discussion about Resident Evil 8 on
Definitely
this
not the last.
series, but
Definitely not the last,
uh,
because there's going to be some depth that we are going to have to go into at some point. But I think touching on the fact that we and the world has kind of come to, at least until the DLCs come out, because if they do like they did with 7, there'll be like 6 of them and they'll all be hugely like game changing and important. But until that happens, I think the world has kind of come to a stopping point with that and their love for Lady Dimitrescu.
I'm impressed you got her name right. I was just gonna say Lady D.
Alcina. Yeah, but
Or
yeah.
Alcina, yeah.
Uh, yeah, but man, it was a roller coaster. Actually, that's not true. It was a, it was all Rise. My feelings on that game did not start in a great place. It's weird because like I was excited for it, and I won't say that when the second I put the game in, I was suddenly like pissed at what was going on. I just was very cautious about what this game was going to be, because I have really come around to realizing that Biohazard 7 was really good, like really, really, really good, not just as a Resident Evil game, but as a video game, and as like a turning point for what games could be, and a way to like bring a piece of gaming history along for the ride rather than leaving it all behind. Like I've really come around to really liking 7, to the point where I kind of think it probably might be my favorite game in the series at this point. And that's even after finishing 8. I'm still standing by that idea. So I was cautious in going into 8, and some stuff that was going on in the early parts of that game that you and I had conversations about were more goofy than good to me. But I kind of really like 8 too. I gotta say, like maybe I just really like Ethan. Like maybe that's my big thing, is Ethan Winters has become like my favorite Resident Evil character. But I ended up really enjoying 8 for what it was. And I've got so many feelings that I want to express about it that we're going to have to talk about it more, because there's some things that, like, you want to talk about ripping about apart a thing and talking way too much and, like, getting into too into the details. Like, I'm all over that game right now. I am in every nook and cranny of 8 right now, trying to figure out what matters, what doesn't, why I like this, why I don't like that. Like I am all over that game.
cool. I'm very happy to say that. So I think that a good place to start is Resident Evil 7, and the fact that I hadn't beaten a Resident Evil game until the remake of 2 in in 2019, and that game hooked me and brought me along for the ride, and I was there day one to play and finish the remake of Resident Evil 3, and I loved my experiences with both of those. But then I was so nervous to go back to Resident Evil 7. And the big hurdle for me was the first person perspective. Like,
For sure.
there was something about that didn't necessarily work for me. And then when Resident Evil 8 was coming on, and I had like 5 different ways that I could play Resident Evil 7 for free, I'm like, well, let's do it. Let's see if it's any good. Let's see if Resident Evil 7 is up to the standards that I have decided exist based on 2 and 3. Resident Evil 7 blew me out of the fucking water. I was so interested in the game that, like, before I was like through to the point that you mentioned, like the choice scenario, like the weird sort of like detractors of it, or like complaints about the game, I'm like, how can you have them? Like, this is, I feel like I'm in a survival situation. It was so good at making me feel like every bullet counts, every herb counts, every choice I make. Am I going to go up the main stairs, or am I going to try to find a back stairwell? Like, has consequences. And even playing through the game later, like, 'cause I eventually got the platinum for it, when I had like the circular saw, which ate through everything, or I had like the magnum from the beginning of the game, or was able to do more damage. Like, it still felt like this game where just because I can do damage doesn't mean that I can be willy-nilly with healing myself. Like, I need to know, do I have to heal myself right now? Or, like, is there something that's coming that could be worse for me?
Did you ever feel that way in your immense amount of time with 2? Like for those that were not here for that ride or not aware of exactly what was going on behind the scenes, like you played through 2 how many times? 8 times?
Yeah, something crazy like that. I played
Yeah.
through Resident Evil 2 at least 5 times.
Yeah. So did you ever hit that point, or did you ever hit a point where 2 where you felt untouchable, where you felt like it's not scary anymore, I'm a god?
No. And I never really felt that way with Resident Evil 7 either. I would be completely honest with you. Both of those games, even like when I jumped into it, like, all right, this is just my cleanup. I have to find the files that I haven't been able to find. Like, that was the first time I realized that Jack is patrolling upstairs. And I'm just like, oh my God, I just made the right moves every other time. And now I had no idea that this was something that you have to deal with. And now that I have to deal with it, even with everything that I have at my disposal, I'm not prepared for this situation. Like, because it was such a wrinkle. And I wondered if it was just like the game itself had some sort of RNG that, like, it doesn't happen until it's your 4th playthrough.
Well,
like, as a
2
way
very
to change
famously, right, 2 very famously would change as you played depending on how you were doing. You know, the number of shots to take down late game zombies would change depending on how many shots you had wasted in the beginning of the first one. And like very famously, like speedrunners, you'll see when they play 2 will stop for a moment and unload a clip or 2 into the wall. And what they're doing is they're making sure that the game's not going to get too difficult later on. Because if you're too good at taking out zombies in the head early game, then late game zombies will take more ammo, right? And so it's adaptive RNG, which is fucking nuts. That's a term that exists. But like, so it's not hard to assume that like Resident Evil 7, as you've been playing it so much, like Jack gets better at looking for you. He breaks down more fucking walls with that goddamn like tyrant move he does.
Yeah, like that's the thing. I'm like, oh God, this is the first time that I've gotten here as quickly as I did. So he's still looking for me. Like I didn't lay low long enough. So like it was cool. Like it made the game feel alive, and it made me feel like I need to actually adapt and be ready for situations and scenarios. Now I will say 7 and my time with 2 definitely felt that way. Resident Evil 3 Remake, a game that I beat again minimum 5 times, after my first playthrough, I felt completely untouchable. I felt like all of the jump scares, I know where they are. What you unlock after you finish 3 is not just like a overpowered weapon, but you unlock a store to purchase overpowered weapons based on the things that you've completed. And I'm just like, oh, I need 2,000 more points. I'll go complete some things to get that money so that I can have an infinite rocket launcher. And then you know what I'm afraid of with an infinite rocket launcher? Literally nothing. Nothing is going to fear me.
It feels like it's a weird payoff. Like they understood at that point in 3 Remake that you had done 2 remake. Like if you were playing 3, you probably touched 2, and if you did, put your time in with that, and you put your time in with your first playthrough of 3, at this point, just fucking have fun. And that felt like that was the catharsis they were hoping you felt in that. But I know for a lot of people, what that meant is it just isn't scary. It's just not scary anymore. That's why I was curious if you ever felt that way in your playthrough of 2, because I've never quite heard anybody say that with 2 they got to a point where they felt they could do anything. But like 3, very famously, in all versions, like this even goes back to the original PlayStation version.
There's a reason why it's the most sped run of the first 3 on PlayStation.
People just feel at some point with Jill that they just fucking can take on the world, and then they do. So yeah.
Which sort of seems like the point of that character. Her arc from the first one into the third one is that she's also becoming hella capable.
Well, because you eventually find out, if you really want to talk about the arc for her character, that she has been infected all along and is actually becoming a bioweapon. By 5, I believe, is when you find out that she's been infected by Wesker.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but that's the thing. Like three, as much as I enjoyed three, and what three still sort of nailed down was, you might feel invincible because you're walking around with an infinite rocket launcher. You're going to get to moments in this game where the rocket launcher isn't enough, where you
Yeah.
need to, like the final boss. Like you can walk through that game on the hardest difficulty, but the final boss, you need to be able to use your pistol to hit small things to like dizzy or make the enemy woozy, and then you need to
Right.
be smart about how you turn back on the fuses in order to use the big ridiculous gun that can actually damage it.
Right.
And
Right.
that like that felt cool because I'm like, this game was easy, this wasn't fun. And then it's like, oh, you thought this was easy? Go fuck yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's interesting. So then you get to Resident Evil 8, and I think we're going to stop it here before we dig any deeper into it, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest difference from those three games that I played and Resident Evil 8 is that it didn't feel like a survival horror game. It felt like an action horror game. And that is a very different experience. And even my first playthrough of 3 felt like survival horror. It wasn't until after I beat it that it turned into sort of an action horror experience. But from jump, Resident Evil 8 felt like it's kind of okay if you use up all your bullets because here's a guy who's willing to sell you more bullets.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that. I think they definitely try to lean more into the action horror stuff. And again, we're gonna have to talk more about this because of the ways in which that's just a Resident Evil franchise move. But it feels like it's much more of an action horror movie. It definitely is more of an action horror game than Seven was. But I think the weird limitations, and some of them too artificial for their own good, but some of the limitations that are there are still pretty like horrific. I mean, without getting too deep into it, there's straight up moments where they take all your shit away.
Yep.
Like stuff like that happens. And again, some moments are too artificial for their own good in a lot of ways. It's why I'm not saying that it's my favorite game in the series. I'm not saying that it's necessarily like as good and groundbreaking as Seven was, and as much as like I have glorified Two in the past, like it's never going to get to those kinds of levels of love for me. But with what this game is trying to do in some of the meta game, and as far as story goes, it is some of the best horror storytelling I have seen in a while. Like I there's been some games that have come out in the recent years. Until Dawn is like the big one that I think of, where like it's a really well told, it's a really good story that isn't always necessarily well told because of a lot of the choices that you make matter in that game. And then we're seeing with their follow up series, their chapter game that they're doing, it's really goofy. Like I don't know if you know anything about their I can't even remember the name of the series. Zach has been playing it, but like Man of La Mancha or whatever the fucking nonsense they call that one, and like there's like a whole bunch of them. They're just dumb. Like I'm just not loving them nearly as much as I did like Seven or now Eight. Like I think there's just some really good storytelling stuff in this one. Um, yeah, man. There's definitely flaws to Eight that are so glaring, especially in comparison to Seven being the precursor to it. But that being said, I think it's still a hell of a time. I think it's still a great video game.
Yeah. I I will say this. I got the platinum for Resident Evil 8 as well, and I'm working on getting it in the PS5 version of the game because I first
Yeah,
got the platinum on the PS4 because that's where I played Resident Evil 7 on, and the
yeah,
others, so it's what I wanted to judge it on first.
yeah,
So it's where it was, but I think as the perfect stinger to wrap up this Resident Evil 8 conversation, the moment that you referenced as feeling artificial was sort of the moment that really grabbed me, and I'm like, this game is great. And then unfortunately, because that came so early in the overall plot, it
yeah,
never
yeah.
reached that height for me again.
It
It'd be
never comes
like,
back.
yeah, it'd be like if the first fall at Splash Mountain was the fall outside, and then every other fall was the fake falls. into the laughing place.
Yeah,
Like,
well, in terms of mechanics, if it ever came back, like all mechanics should, like you should, then I would have been more about it. But the fact that not only do you never have a moment again where all your shit disappears, but instead there's a straight up moment where you are basically turned into a fucking tank of a character.
yeah. And I'm
We'll
excited
we'll
to
get into more
explore
detail
that
about it.
deeper.
Yeah,
But
we'll
that's
get more about
interesting.
it.
It's interesting to see how we both approach those two moments and talk with it. But I will say, Ethan Winters, and I love me some Claire Redfield. I love me some Leon Kennedy, and I even love Jill Valentine up to a point. Ethan Winters is my favorite Resident Evil protagonist. Like, that's not even hard for me to say. And
Well, maybe the next time we talk, I'll have some good news for you because there's some stuff floating around that I've got to verify. But yeah, I gotta like the story for Ethan and the ways in which he is an everyman caught up in this insane fucking world is unique to a mainline Resident Evil game and really, really, really well handled in both games.
yeah. And then I can't wait to explore it deeper on that. Which brings me to the last topic that we want to touch on before we send this one over to Will to say goodbye and then to everyone to listen to. And that is, I want to give an update on non-fungible tokens. And
Oh
not,
yeah,
and only because it means I get to say non-fungible token again.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and I don't think there's much of an update to give here, but
well,
everybody else seems to be losing their shit right now. So
well, that's the thing, is that the reason why I think this update is important is everyone is saying that the bubble is burst, right? That NFTs are over. Non-fungible tokens, it came, it went, and it's gone. But what's actually happening, and this is what happens so often with the bubbles when they burst, is it's just become part of the background noise of our world.
yeah.
Like, they're not going anywhere. NFTs are still going to be a way that certain rich people and people who hope to be rich play with their money.
Well, and kids, like,
Yeah.
and I say kids in as derogatory of a term as I possibly could mean it, because what I mean is like people with play money, people with disposable income that want to fuck around in something cool will always like NFTs will always be there for those kinds of people.
Yeah, and I think that's how I wanted to approach it and update it on the Say report. Is that just because all news outlets are acting like they're over, they're as dead as Mom, American Housewife, and Superstore, they're not. They're just not going to be focused on anymore by the mainstream media unless something truly awe-inspiring happens.
Yeah. As any super stonk ape on Reddit can tell you, that this is the moment to actually buy into them. But like, yeah, it's ridiculous to think that this is dead. If anything, this is just the money consolidating in the hands of a few people that are then gonna own the market when it eventually blows back up again. So
Yeah. And that's an important step in future economics, neo-economics, that we are currently right in the middle of, that we're immersed in. And it really also speaks to just how poorly informed the media makes us sometimes.
sometimes purposely so when it comes to this shit, but
Yes,
like
sir.
we're not gonna get into that conspiracy stuff.
Not this
Looking at you,
late into
Kramer.
an episode.
Yeah.
Plus,
no.
I had to use my tinfoil to wrap up the rest of my chicken sandwich, so I don't have a hat available right now. But you let me know in advance. I can have a hat ready, Sejohn, and we can talk about the robots and the machine and the robot machine. I mean, you're a Roomba, Sejohn. It's confirmed. You're a Roomba.
Just going around the desert in Utah, just cleaning up the dirt.
All right, so I think that's everything from me. Anything else that you want to add before we say goodbye?
Only because it's not going to be worth talking about next time. But you know, we're gonna get real big off of my fame on BuzzFeed. I'm just gonna point that out.
Oh,
I'm a new
really?
BuzzFeed celebrity, and now the show's gonna blow up everybody, and I'm gonna get too big for my britches. No, yeah, I think what'll inevitably happen to all of us is we will all end up on some BuzzFeed list eventually. But anybody that was keeping an eye on Facebook and stuff, I had some friends and family that were sharing some silly shit because apparently I ended up in a BuzzFeed list making fun of Midwesterners and penchant for fried food. But I just want to say that I stand by what I said. I have no shame in it. And BuzzFeed, I am funnier than that. If you want to find some other tweets of mine, but that's all.
Man, Andy Warhol said everybody's only get 15 minutes of fame. I'm sorry if those are yours. I didn't even realize it was you, Sejohn. I'ma just be that guy. With like, oh, this is good. It's like the next natural progression of Yahoo Answers. I thought that's what you shared it with me for. I mean, I had some other stuff going on, I'll admit. I was girding my loins to travel in a country that still isn't 100%, right? From a relatively safe zone to who knows? But
like 46% right now, which is not a great number, guys.
No,
Get
it's
out there.
really not. I mean, Alabama is shuttering their mass vaccination things with less than 30% of the state vaccinated. Like,
great.
That's as we hear from.
Y'all want a second wave? Because this is how you get a second wave.
That's how you get a third wave. Let's be honest. I mean, that's what the UK is admitting right now. In Parliament, that we were not fucking prepared for this. And it's all right. I mean, like, less COVID talk than usual, but you know, both of us kind of jumped face first into it, wearing masks. But still, we faced it this week, and it'd be weird not to talk about that in addition to everything else. So, if you would like to cite more things that Sejohn has said online to BuzzFeed, make sure you also tag Sejohn at Siege versus the World.
And if you want to get Devon on one of them lists, then go ahead and find some of the funny shit he said and go ahead and tag BuzzFeed at Devon D. Decker.
Great. I look forward to nothing happening. I don't know how to be funny on Twitter. I just say things like matter of fact. But maybe that can be humor? Could I be the next Ben Stein? We've lost the thread. Will, please bring us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.